Sorry for the slight delay. Gonna make some copies. Um, since we last met as a subcommittee, Representative Infantine and myself met with the Department of Labor and had a very in-depth conversation. They had done a lot of work, done a lot of research, and they had offered us two options for an amendment. And I intended to have an actual amendment today, but and you folks are great about getting something to us on Monday, but OLS seems to be busy with 800 LSRs. So I did not get the amendments yet. But at any rate, this is nicely done by the attorneys with the Department of Labor, and it effectively provides two options. And the first option basically adopts the 1910 standards, D through Z, with the exception of U, and it is adopted 3 years from now. The idea is to give everyone who needs it, including the department, plenty of time for the preparation to learn the standards, to deal with whatever needs to be dealt with, and basically the department would be putting on additional personnel in order to help the the employers with the transition. So it seemed to be a more workable manner of adopting the 1910 standards, providing that 3-year window to get ready for everyone. That's option one. Option two is a little bit different. It comes out of the department as an alternative, and essentially, instead of adopting 1910 as written by OSHA, it uses 1910 as I think it's fair to say, as a guide, and that the department over the course of 3 years would engage in rulemaking that would come up with standards that are at least as effective as the OSHA standards. So basically, all those gaps that exist in the current Department of Labor standards would be filled using OSHA as a guide as to what needs to be filled. And they would basically take those 3 years to do that. One difference is that they probably would not need as many additional employees for the ramp up. Their thought is that the standards would be at least as effective, but perhaps easier to read. And so employers who are going through the standards that are developed through rulemaking will have an easier time figuring out exactly what they need to do. But they still have that 3-year window to get ready, and anybody who wants to get ahead of the department can simply use the 1910 standards to say, okay, what's still coming? It also gives them the authority to skip some sections. If there's a section that does not apply to any public sector employer in the state, if it deals with mining or something like that, there's no need to have standards for safe standards around mining for public sector workers in New Hampshire. But any section that is applicable to the public sector workers in New Hampshire would have rules that are developed to reflect that. Also provides for an annual review of standards, so that if OSHA upgrades its standards, the department would write rules to reflect those upgrades so that it remains at least as effective as the OSHA standards. And it also indicates that the commissioner may seek additional staffing. That staffing would be paid out of the funds that the department has on hand, but it would need to get authorization to use those funds for that additional staffing. And I guess I would ask Chairman Infantine if he's got, if I've missed anything, and frankly, I'll be happy to hear from the department as well.
Representative Sullivan, no, I don't have any comments about what you said. You've stated it, correctly as per our meeting with the department. Really, what it comes down to is trying to implement something that is manageable to both the department, municipal, and government bodies and the employees that serve on, that are within those departments. My concern has always been what we don't know, and wanting to make sure that we don't implement something that we find out later has caused considerable cost or inconvenience to the to these parties. I saw your finger, so I'll let you. We just have a dialogue.
Yep, that's right. Yep. I just remembered something. Folks may recall the Department of Employment, no, not Employment, Department of Environmental Services came in with a concern that they've got air quality testing equipment that is very high quality, very high tech, very expensive. However, it's made overseas. And so it would not meet the OSHA certification requirements. Because if we went with option one, they would probably be required to replace that equipment with OSHA certified equipment. If we went with option two, it would allow the department to, or it would allow the Department of Labor to effectively certify that equipment as at least effective and at least as effective, and they could continue using it. So when the unknowns happen, and when the other example that was used during our meeting was rather interesting. Was it Exeter? Yeah. Exeter has a town building, town hall probably, that is very historic. The entrance door is a big, thick oak wooden door. OSHA would not approve that door as being a fire door. In order to be approved by OSHA with a bona fide fire door, it has to be, certain standards, and it has to have a plate attached to it, labeling it as OSHA or as a fire door. Apparently, if you paint over that that label, it is no longer a certified fire door. If you remove the label, even though it's the same door, it's no longer a certified fire door. Certainly, these oak doors don't have labels, don't have any, would not be deemed certified fire doors, but the department suggests, and I would have to trust their expertise, that those oak doors would serve as fire doors. And the town of Exeter would not have to put a new, upgraded, very modern fire door on a building that's very historic, indoors, and replacing doors that are themselves very historic. So the air testing equipment, the oak fire doors are examples of things that happen in New Hampshire that OSHA wouldn't be happy about. And I think the anticipation is going to what Chairman Infantine said. Um, the as towns and departments and all the public entities in the state have the department come in and say, can you do a review for us? Can you give us an idea where we stand? Other examples of like the oak doors may pop up. Might be dramatically different from that, but there just might be other issues that OSHA wouldn't like, but the New Hampshire Department of Labor could say this is as effective as the OSHA certified whatever. And so it puts the department in a position to determine whether or not things that are going on in the counties, in the schools, in the towns, in the agencies, whether they're as effective or need to be upgraded. And in my opinion, option two probably is the direction I would suggest we head. But I'd be happy to hear from other members of the committee as to what their thoughts are. And hopefully I've talked long enough so that you've had a chance to read it.
You have some questions to the room?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Which part would allow the commissioner to make those types of exemptions?
It is the part that reads, so the very first paragraph, employers shall provide employees a level of protection that is at least as effective. So those words are what allows the department to make a judgment as to whether or not the safety environment within a particular public entity is at least as effective. Without those words, it would have to be exactly the same as OSHA standards.
Thank you. Couple things. Hillsborough also has a big oak door in our library, so that I think would also apply. One of the things that was brought to my attention over the last couple weeks is that OSHA has a specific standard for the marine, the people that patrol marine and anybody who's working out in the waters. And I have not gone through our 1910 standard to see how we're addressing that in our 1910, or if it is even addressed. My understanding from the conversation, and I'm okay being corrected if I misunderstood, is that 1910 does not address the marine standards, but that there is a specific OSHA regulation that does. And given our Marine Patrol and other public entities that operate on our waters, I think we should consider that as well as to how that's going to be handled.
And I guess I would look to the department. I know that Attorney Gardner went through this in minute detail. So are you familiar with whether or not 1910 has marine, or whether the other there are two other sections of OSHA standards that perhaps may?
So yes, thank you for the question. So as I understand it, again, as we've talked about, 1910 is general industry, so there's probably some pieces that will go to some of the marine aspects of it. And if I remember correctly, I believe it's either 1926, 1928, or there is another set of standards as well that is very, very detailed as to marine aspects. So again, to your specific question, I think there's some pieces that would be applicable in the 1910s, again, just being general industry. But if the committee wanted to actually drill down and get to more very specific standards, it might have to look at the other sections of OSHA in later sessions.
Thank you. Gentlemen?
I have some questions about staff.
Sure.
So in terms of staffing, which was mentioned in one of the proposals, the increase in staffing, can you give me a sense of what you're looking to do in terms of staffing. And the other question I have is that there was I was reading an audit of the DOL, I think it's a year or two ago, and they talked about the shifting costs into the workers' comp. And I think there was some issue around how much of the department's responsibility was being moved over to the comp end. So I don't know where the money is coming from to do this, but it seemed to me in reading that audit report, there are some limitations as shifting some of these costs over to, because the way the DOL is structured is there are kind of petitions between the way that the administrative fund, the comp fund, and other things like that. So tell me how that's going to work, and if you could also give me a sense of what you think you would need, and given, and I don't know how many workplaces there are in New Hampshire, but maybe give us a sense of how this would work, and if we're going to do it, we should do it the best we can, I guess.
No, sorry. From the last meeting, and quote me if I'm wrong, I think it was like 250 municipalities.
I believe that's what the commissioner found. Yes.
So it's about 250 municipalities plus, depending on how you count state agencies, about 40 state agencies. So for option one, which is what I call the holistic adoption of 1910, wholesale adoption over the course of 3 years, we're thinking just because it's a wholesale adoption, that there'll be confusion and a need for additional inspections during that 3-year time frame, where the inspectors are going to go in, they're going to be basically doing double inspections, one for current compliance and one for where they need to be in 3 years. We're thinking they will need 12 staff members plus maybe one additional administrative staff member person. Currently, our inspectors, our safety inspectors, are labor grade 22. Entry level with no experience starts at $50,485.50. Top end of that labor grade is $71,155.50. If we kept it at that same labor grade, which I'm not sure if we would, we haven't had that level of discussion. But if we talk about that plus benefits, the lower end benefit package that we try to estimate would be employee plus one, cost $31,728 in addition to their wages. So it's about $100,000 per employee for the inspectors. So that's option one. We are looking into whether or not contractors is something that might be applicable to here. We don't know what the cost is for that. As well as the requirement, how you can oversee the work of a contractor. That's not something the department has done before. We have a very, very limited contract line now, in the amount, and by limited in funds. So that's something that we would be willing to explore as well with respect to making those staffing needs. So if that's option one. Option two, given the fact that we're going to be controlling the language and the accessibility of the rules that we'll be adopting, because they're going to be equivalent to OSHA, but the wording would be different. We're not adopting all of the federal 1910 standards. It would be only things that are applicable. We think that, the training, let me go back to training for an inspector. Under current standards for our safety inspectors takes about 6 months to get them into, on their own, out on the road, able to assess and do a complete inspection. I'm thinking with a federal OSHA standard, that'll take about a year to get them up to speed. And again, we've never done this before, so this is an estimate. And then, so that to keep that in mind as well, with respect to how quickly we can get them up to speed and on the road. For the option two, because they'll be more accessible, I don't think training will take as long, and we will still need more inspectors on the road, just because more regulation means more inspectors. It's more babysitting of a case, observing and getting into current compliance. So I'm thinking 6 inspectors plus 1 additional administrative staff member. The problem with both plans, though, just so that you're aware, one of the things to be aware of, we have very limited space within the Department of Labor's building currently. I our safety inspectors, I can barely fit the three positions that I have now. We would need to rent additional space to house additional staff. And we can, I can't speak directly to the costs where, where the budget would be excessive. Okay.
Before you start, I'd like to publicly congratulate you on your elevation to the deputy commissioner.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. I'll do my best. I'm Danielle Albert. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Labor. I will do my best to answer the question. Relative to where the funding would come from, what the department has proposed with both proposals, whether it's the wholesale adoption or the as effective as option, the funding stream would come through primarily two mechanisms. It would be through the administration fund that's set forth through 281A59. I think that's what was referred to as the insurance carrier assessment, which is through the workers' compensation statute, which includes the safety provisions that come along with workers' compensation. There are certain safety requirements set forth in the workers' comp statute that require employers to provide safe workplace environments such that you can minimize and reduce the costs associated with workplace injuries, and through the restricted fund, which is where the other revenues that the department brings in come through. There is discretion in the language for the commissioner to determine how to apportion that funding, but those would be the funding mechanisms that the department would be looking at with either option, whether it's the enhanced number of staff needed for a wholesale adoption or whether the somewhat reduced number of staff that would be needed for the as likely as option.
And is it fair to say that neither option would have an impact on the general fund?
I think it's possible, and I'm not certain at this point that I would be accurate in trying to quantify that. I think it would depend, but it is possible.
Follow up on that briefly.
Thank you. So early on when we met in the subcommittee, there was conversation about federal funding that we could apply for if we go to the OSHA standards. I'm assuming that if we would go to option number 2, that federal funding wouldn't be available because it's going to be your own department making the rulemaking?
I believe that to be accurate, and I'll defer to Attorney Gardner if I'm not.
To clarify, option 1 and option 2 would give us no federal funding. What you're referring to is the OSHA state plan, which requires adoption of all OSHA standards. And as we discussed at the committee you're referencing, that's a very, very lengthy process that's in conjunction with OSHA. So neither option would get us any federal funds, unfortunately. Of course.
Let me ask you. See, the department's going to return based on a statement that you made, I think last week, that the department will send back to the rainy day fund some $3 million this year. This is in addition to the $2+ million they sent back in the past. Now, the stream for that money, is that available in any way for this kind of work where does the $3 million come from?
Thank you for the question. The give back provision, or the give back that the department is making this year, roughly $3 million, and the amount prior was, I believe, $2 million, comes from the revenue that the department takes in primarily through its civil penalty assessment actions. That involves both insurance carriers as well as through the labor laws that are currently codified. The funding, the amount that gets brought in is dependent. It's dependent upon a couple of things. It's dependent upon insurance carrier compliance. It's dependent upon employer compliance and how many violations on either side under 281A or under 275, 276, and all the other labor statutes that come about. It fluctuates. If you look at the history of what the department has turned back over to the general fund in excess revenue in that context, it has changed from year to year. But it comes from the excess revenue that we're taking in primarily through our penalty actions.
Is that available on this section? One additional step.
I think I believe it to be, and I will correct if I am inaccurate, that it could be. I would note that given that there is some inconsistency dependent upon what the department has come across within the preceding year or so, that the amount available would fluctuate. Oh, no worries. No worries at all. Thank you.
But I also know that the commissioner in our meeting last week indicated that he was going to check to find out what the procedure would be for accessing those funds for
Yes.
this purpose. Has he had a chance to do that at this point?
I do not believe that we have an answer thus far.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
So there was a question about writing a new standard and then getting it through JLCAR. So what's the expectation that you're going to drop pages and pages of revisions on that committee? And if that doesn't go through, this whole thing goes down, basically doesn't work, correct?
Meaning the option 2 sector doing it
Yeah,
via
if they
the
included
rulemaking.
to do either one, you'd have to go in front of JLCAR for the.
Yes, if option 2 were the option that ultimately ended up going forward, it would be subject to the same requirements that any form of rulemaking would go through, meaning that it has to go through that JLCAR rulemaking process and finally approved by JLCAR. I would note that I think historically the department has had very good success in drafting its rules and has not had difficulty typically having them pass through JLCAR, but they would be subject to that level of review and final JLCAR approval.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to follow up on that because we have all these wonderful things called rules and laws. So we pass a law that says X. Am I correct that your rule making that would go to JLCAR is just explaining how you're going to enforce them? It is not adopting an entire package of, if this committee passes a bill and it gets passed and signed by the governor, we have a law that says, again, we don't know what it's to look like, but pretty good idea of what it would look like, and it would state a lot of the details associated with 1910. So JLCAR doesn't have to approve 1910, correct? They're just approving your implementation of 1910.
Yes, Representative Infantine, I think that's an accurate statement. The statutory language, if it went into effect, would give the department rulemaking authority and sets that tone of the requirement that there be rules, that the department is implementing standards that are at least as effective as the OSHA 1910 standards provisions, the D through Z, the exception of subpart U. It's not the rules themselves. And I'm not certain if that answered your question.
So what was that last sentence?
But it's not the rules themselves. So the
Correct.
statute's not mandating the language in the rules themselves. It does give the authority to the department to then promulgate those rules. The rules would be promulgated or written with the eye towards 1910 as that guidepost, as Representative Sullivan had explained, incorporating the portions that are necessary for New Hampshire's public municipalities, school districts, state agencies. Those portions would then be going through that final JLCAR approval process.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that the entire 1910 doesn't get approved by JLCAR. It's just their rules about implementation of it.
That would be correct.
And could you envision in some places saying the 1910 standard is written in a manner that we want to adopt and just use the OSHA language as is? Would you anticipate doing that in some instances?
It would, if the assessment were that's what was necessary, that is something that could be done. I don't know at this juncture whether or not that would be necessary, given that we're not in that spot as of right now. But I do not believe that there would be anything in the proposed language for that section option that would preclude or prevent the department from saying this section of 1910 is exactly the rule that the department requires in order to enforce a certain type of safety standard throughout the state of New Hampshire, and taking or utilizing that language wholesale.
Okay.
And I'll look at Attorney Gardner in case I've misspoken on that.
No, I obviously agree with Deputy Commissioner Albert. And just a kind of point of clarity here. Each option here as of the effective date, would require all employers subject to this chapter to provide safety that's at least as effective as Section 1910. So to your question, Representative McKenzie, say, for example, that the rulemaking doesn't go through. Obviously, I think that's problematic in the sense that we all want employers to understand what standards they're being held to, and that's the point of the rulemaking provision. But again, as of the date of the effective date of either of these bills, the employers would be required to provide that level of protection. So it's not a matter of if the rulemaking doesn't go through for, say, ladders, then there's nothing on ladders. It's just a reference to 1910 versus an explicit explanation in rulemaking.
Something that wasn't immediately clear to me on this, I'm glad I'm thinking of this because it is a question we needed to get out. Can you describe how the replacement of current standards with the new standards as you do with rulemaking, would it be a situation where the rules stay in, the rulemaking process is effectively sort of a rolling replacement of current standards?
Yes, I think that would be accurate to state, as testified to previously. The intent with this would be not just merely the 3-year plan, but an annual review to see if there's any updated standards that might be applicable to New Hampshire employers as well. So again, just going forward, there would be an annual review of all standards to make sure that they make sense and we're providing safety that's at least as effective as Section 1910.
Because one of the issues that we had identified, I think 2 weeks ago, was that if the bill calls for the repeal of all current Department of Labor standards, in the eventual replacement, it would leave a vacuum for a period of time, which we don't want.
That's correct. The caveat being that, again, the first section of each of these bills would require employers to provide that level of protection, but it hurts clarity.
So essentially, the current standards would remain in place until the rulemaking process, in bits and pieces over the next 3 years, replaces the current standards with at least as effective standards.
Correct. Any current standards in place, the department would review in light of the 1910 standards, determine if there needs to be an update to those, and then obviously anything that's silent, we would determine how far we need to go with those standards, what we need to implement for New Hampshire employers.
So option 2 does not require need a section that talks about repealing, because the rulemaking process itself effectively does the repealing.
I think that would be correct to state. And obviously, if there's anything that the department found through the rulemaking process or review of our standards, whether it's, again, rules we would update through the JLCAR process. If it's something that's statutory, we would bring it to the legislature and advise that there might need to be an update to this.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, for some of the members of the committee, 1910 has letters A through Z, right? We are excluding A and B. A is general, B is adoption of extension of establishing federal standards, and C currently is blank, it's reserved, right? We also do not have, they do not have subparts V, W, X, and Y. So I just want to make sure we amend the to not include those because they're reserved. So what I don't want to happen is next a bill passes here and a year from now, OSHA decides they want to include a new section V. Well, if we include in our laws, it's automatic. So I want to exclude, make sure we do exclude U, which is the COVID part, V, W, X, and Y, which are reserved in blank. So just so you know what the A through Z are. If you want, you can see this outline. One of the things that we discussed in the meeting, which I always enjoy getting up at 6:15 in the morning and watching the sunrise over the mountains of Arizona, but it was fine. I got to see a Roadrunner that morning.
Hey.
So, hey, it was worth it. You know how big a Roadrunner is? Not that tall. Not like, you think on TV with the coyote and whatever. So one of the things we discussed was kind of a misnomer that the department is supposed to review rules regarding safety and update them every 2 years. That is not accurate. Okay, it is every 10 years. And that's important because I will tell you, I think door number one, the wholesale adoption. What I'm always afraid of, Representative Sullivan, is things that we don't know. You know, we've been here long enough, you and I and a number of people here on this committee have been here long enough to know that what we do when we sit here and pass a piece of legislation sounds good. We think we're doing the right thing, and then it gets out into the real world, and sometimes we find that it needs a little tweaking. But again, we don't want to be perfect, get in the way of getting something done. So I would rather move, if anything, with option 2. You're talking 6 employees versus 12. You have a situation where you don't have a place to house the employees as it is, having to get it through a second committee on finance. The goal is to get something passed. There's no goal in getting something passed through the House, which is not going to get passed by the Senate and implemented. So option 2 has a better chance of getting that done. My desire, which sounds good to me, but probably not easy to implement, is option 3. Because I'm afraid of,
Oh,
all right, I mean, well, we talked, you know what I'm gonna say. I talked about it on the telephone.
go ahead.
Option 3, which is, why don't you just update your standards to things you want to do? Okay, you have a standard that is in place right now. Right? Hasn't been updated in maybe 8 or 10 years. So what I want to do is take some of the things that are most important from A through Z and implement those. The problem, as it's been expressed to me by staff, is there will be contradictions between possibly the current rules and laws and some of these in 1910. I'm not saying I have the answer to what that is, because I am an idiot and I have read a lot of this stuff. And I can tell you, I've been in the insurance business for 30 years and I'm OSHA 10 certified, and I don't even know how to read some of this stuff. Okay, so let alone some of the things that some of the municipalities are gonna have to find someone to train, or whether we're gonna have to have the trainer people, someone from the Department of Labor. So I'm trying to implement this slowly, as you have agreed to, in a 2 or 3 year period, which I'm thankful and appreciative, and appreciate you doing that. Because I just don't want to make some of these mistakes, because I don't want someone coming in front of us and saying, well, you know, those oak doors, even though we put a little thing on them or whatever, yeah, it's still not going to work. It's still not. And so I'm fearful of the unknown, but not so fearful that I don't want us to do something. So you don't have me at hello, but you had me at least better. Come on, that was funny. I'm not that funny, so when I have one, you got to laugh at me. So at least looking at number 2 and starting there, but that's really my only concern, Representative Sullivan, is implementing stuff. There was a bill, you were not here at the time. A bill passed the House and the Senate and was signed by the governor out of this committee that was so bad that we had to go back the first week of January and repeal it. Requiring everyone to have workers' compensation regardless of whether you're an employer or not, an employee or owner or not. We kind of rejiggered it, and now that any state-funded project, everyone on the site has to have it. So, you know, we solved it in a certain way. But yeah, I mean, Governor Lynch had to yank us all in the first week of January and repeal it. So I just don't want to do something where we have that, because it has been too long since there's been some updates. I can't sit here in my profession and say we shouldn't be safer. That would be foolish. So I'm between option 2, which I will am happier with, and then option 3. So please, for the record, for everybody else here, why option 3, or I'm going to call it door number 3, could probably be too problematic to implement.
May I?
Yeah, sure. You're the chairman. Committee.
In my former life, I dealt with schools and school boards and superintendents. And one of the things that I observed is the superintendent would often be very careful to say, I don't do policy, the school board does that. The school board is the decision-making body. And then a good superintendent would steer that school board into making good decisions that the professional educator helps them with. I see that has kind of happened here. The department, I mean, we're the policymakers. That was stated at our meeting last week by the commissioner. That is true. You are not the policymakers, we are. Keep that straight. However, then the department went and developed an option that, I mean, they never said so. You can if you want, but I believe option 2 is something that you feel is far more reasonable for the state of New Hampshire than the wholesale adoption. And on that basis, and the fact that you guys put it together, if you put something together that you can't do, shame on you. So I'm going to believe that you put something together that you firmly believe the department can implement. That's what we asked you 2 weeks ago to do. We want a clean implementation of this process. And you put together option 1 because that's pretty much where we were going into last week. And then you gave us option 2, which was a modification of that I think does what Representative Infantine was talking about. It allows the department to do its thing, to adopt New Hampshire standards, but it also provides a guide through the 1910 standards to make sure that we don't end up what we've got now. Right now, we've got standards, but it's full of gaps. And that was one of the primary objections to where we are compared to where we want to go. And I believe this option 2 plan would fill those gaps. It won't fill any gaps that don't need to be filled because you've got the authority to skip over sections that are not applicable. But it does fill in all the gaps that do apply to public sector entities in New Hampshire. And so I, for one, would like to take the department's lead. You did what we asked you to do, and there will be some who will be. I'll tell you the downside to doing option 2 is that it does not adopt the 1910 standards, and it would make it more difficult down the road to create a state plan. The state plan, as Representative Susi, reminded us, comes with money, federal money. Option 1 puts us closer to adopting a state plan somewhere down the road. Option 2 leaves us with a lot of state standards that won't match 1910. They will be at least as effective, but they won't match. But having said that, I still think option 2 is the way we ought to go because effectively it gets us to a safer spot, which is what we're trying to do here. And if people down the road, 5-10 years from now, want to do a state plan, I say go for it, but that's not where we are now. I would entertain a motion unless there's further discussion that we need.
I would like further discussion if I could.
I'm not shutting it down.
So Option 2. Roman numeral 4. The commissioner shall have authority to determine if standards are inapplicable to employers and are unnecessary to implement. Representative Sullivan had mentioned mining. Okay. I'm looking at A through Z here. And I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you can't answer, no harm, no foul. Anything in particular? Obviously, you wouldn't want to take out medical and first aid. You wouldn't want to take out fire protection. You wouldn't want to take out compressed gas, material handling, machinery and machining guarding. I mean, I don't know which one you'd take out. That's what I'm trying to say here as I look through all of these: welding, cutting and brazing, which electrical, driving.
So it wouldn't necessarily be take out, it would be simplify. So for example, and condense. So it basically what I would be looking to do is take that and this and try to figure out a happy medium. So for example, the ladder section in 1910 and platform section in 1910 are basically identical. So we don't need both sections wholesale adopted. We can combine the two. So it would be making it so that when we're handing someone our new rule book, it's not the shock of 1,100 pages. So I don't know what it's going to end up being in the end, but it's going to be simplifying and condensing 1910 so it's more accessible. There isn't that fear of oversaturation of rules where a person is handed 1,100 pages and says, I'm not even going to read that. Tell me what I need to do. I want something that someone looks at and says, well, I'll at least give it a shot and try. So that's so that is what we're looking at for when it comes to a 1910 like adoption of our rules. And just to address your position, Representative Sullivan, I think so. This plan option 2 is modeled over the FAME model. It's the federal annual mandatory evaluations of OSHA states. So states that are trying to become OSHA states. So if becoming an OSHA state in the future becomes a goal of New Hampshire, it's basically a different way to get there. We're already doing the annual reviews that a FAME state does. So it's a different way to get there, but I think it also is, doesn't close off an option. We already have that skeleton annual review because OSHA, they acknowledge that their plan is not the best plan. Any plan that a state should adopt should be something where every year is evaluated and changed and things are actually getting looked at and addressed. So again, I think it is another way of meeting the same goal. We're putting steps in place which OSHA would like states that are looking to become OSHA states to have. So again, it's just a different way of going at the same goal.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Let's talk about a timeline here. Okay. Let's say this thing gets signed, the law gets signed by the governor in June of 24. Okay. So in order to take this and that and put it together, let's look, what time frame we're looking at? 6 months, a year?
So it's going to be a same 3-year rollout. So over time, so we're going, and so when the plans that we were asked to try to create an action plan initially was a holistic approach or a piecemeal approach. So adopting 1910 as it reads right now, you can't adopt in a piecemeal approach. Too many sections reference each other. So it will cause confusion amongst the municipalities. We're adopting provision C, but that references something, not C, D, but that references something in E. So, what are we adopting? What aren't we? Would be a question that we would have to constantly explain to the public employers if we did a piecemeal adoption of 1910 as it reads. With the option 2 that we're talking about here, we can do a piecemeal because, again, it will be rolling rule adoption over the course of the 3 years to minimize the sticker shock, the cost to towns. They can budget and plan and roll things out in stages, as opposed to now 6 months you need to be in full compliance with 1910. So it is a 3-year rollout plan. We'll be evaluating rules. The initial plan would be to fill in the gaps that we do not address currently in our 1400 rules. Then look at where we can strengthen the things that we already speak to. This would be the second stage of the 3-year rollout plan.
And I would point out that in section 4, Roman 4, the last sentence indicates that it's, these standards would be at least as effective within 3 years from the passage of this act. So that's what sets up the 3-year timeline.
Understood, Mr. Chairman. I need to be kind of a little more specific on the timeline, and I'm not trying to harp, but I just need to mentally understand this because I'm sure it'll be asked of me. It gets implemented, it gets passed in June. You have 6 months to try to figure something out, because then you have to present it. You know, the world needs to see it.
Correct.
Okay. And then you still have 2.5 years, and you can do your, as you described earlier, a pencil audit going into these places to see where they don't meet the new rules.
So the
All right.
pencil audits start from the passage. So for me, so that's how I'm
How?
so
If
that
you don't have your thing yet.
correct. So we'll be looking at it and saying what's not at least as effective and things that we'll be addressing down the line. But in the meantime, but they won't be held accountable to that. It's like, these are our current standards. This is what we've currently set, and this is where you're deficient. And with current standards, you have to get it to current standard code. But in the meantime, this is where we're leading. So please start budgeting for that. Because my inspectors are going to be the ones helping me draft these rules in conjunction with our legal unit. So they'll know what's to come. So they've already started writing now. So that'll be the plan, as we all already know what's in the distance, so we can start informing the general public and the stakeholders, the municipalities, public employers. Then we'll have our annual meetings which we will be proposing our changes in advance. So to let them know these are the changes that are going to be coming in, and we're going to be proposing to GELCAR, and have the public session for them to speak about what any concerns. There could be another Town of Exeter issue that we didn't foresee. We knew about Town of Exeter because we recently inspected them. DES, that was something that we learned of at this meeting. We didn't know about how their air quality machines would be impacted by a 1910 rollout. So that's where I anticipate the stakeholders bringing up their concerns, so that we don't adopt something that would make New Hampshire less safe or less reasonable with respect to our safety standards.
And you actually have, it's not 6 months that you have to write rules, it's 3 years you have. So essentially, you can start writing rules immediately, start feeding them into GELCAR, and you've got a 3-year period of time to get the job completely done and have all of your rules at least as effective.
That's the plan, yes. But with there being piecemeal adoption of our rules over time, so that's not year 3, learn that. So that's the plan.
One of the I'm saying this kind of jokingly, politely. I would not recommend saying again sticker shock in any of your testimony, because that's the big concern that some of us have. We don't know what the cost is going to be yet, and we don't know the cost we might be passing on. I live in the city of Manchester. I can tell you that they're scratching their heads at some of the departments in Manchester, with the Department of Parks and Recs and what this is going to do to them. And when they ask me, I can't tell them what the costs are going to be, because again, we're just getting down to option 2 here versus the initial option 1. So that is a concern. The cost.
So option 2 would not have and I have the NRTL. So this is and I had already provided copies to both Representative Sullivan and Infantine of what is required to be NRTL approved. So wherever there is an equally safe option to NRTL approval, we would not be adopting that. So the solid oak doors in Exeter, those are effective, even if not more so than what they construct today for fire doors. So that is something where we would maintain our reasonableness standard on option 2 that we would lose in option 1, a wholesale adoption of 1910.
I'm sorry, where, I lost you. Okay. Thank you.
You don't have one.
No,
You're in Arizona.
that's right. Lucky me, huh?
What?
You have a question down here?
Yep. What I just passed out was what you were just referring to, the list of NRTL approved things. And I think that sort of led us into the oak door discussion, as I recollect. Representative Colcom.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to go back and revisit my question regarding the Marine Patrol, Fish and Game, and those public entities that work on the waters, and how they're going to be affected by what we're changing. So are they currently covered under our standards in the state? So where 1910 does not cover that and 1926 or 28 does, how are they going to be impacted by what we're doing here?
And I have to look at it because it's, currently the ports, I believe, so are what is impacted under 1910, but I'll have to double check that. It's been a little while since I looked directly at the maritime. Because again, it's so infrequent that we have a very, I think it's just one location where it would be really impacted. Well, 2 locations. So it doesn't come up very often, so I'd have to look at it. As I believe there's a port also in addition to the Marine Patrol that would be impacted. So I think it's just 2 public employers really that it would branch into. So I have to look into that and find out.
Okay, thanks. What about Fish and Game where they're working on our lakes?
They
and-
would
and other
fall
water?
under us, yes.
They would follow under the
So-
standards right now?
They are. Are there any specific marine standards? No. So it would be a general duties, but they do fall under it as a public employee. Yes, all public employers all fall under our statutes currently. Is there anything specific to them? No.
What about the fire departments and the local municipalities that have boats that go out and they may go out and tend to people who are drowning or accident
Correct.
victims on
They
the
all
water?
fall under us. There's nothing specific to marine time. Marine.
So will they be impacted by this change?
There would be
over-
more specification. Yes.
Just leave it at that.
There are various organizations in the state, prisons being one of them, that has a national standard, that they follow the national standard, and I don't think they're covered by OSHA, prisons.
Correct.
So how do you accommodate that? The public employees, they're in this environment, you're passing rules, do you exempt them? And I think the nursing homes are very similar to that as well.
So currently, they do fall, nursing homes and the prisons, we were in there a couple months ago, do fall under our jurisdiction. So where they fall under both federal standards, so it's, usually, again, right now, the federal standards are more protective in the sense that they're more specific to what our laws state. So it is, because our current laws were based off of OSHA a long time ago. So it's basically the skeleton of what they have today. So it's just more detailed. So they are already basically, if they are following the federal standards, which apply to them, they're at least as protective as our current standards. And it wouldn't necessarily impact, and either plan wouldn't impact them currently. Now, where the issue was the DES issue, environmental services. They have a state, so their federal grant money is contingent upon them complying with all state and federal laws. So for them currently, they are following their state mandated safety laws. So if we were to adopt 1910 wholesale and they weren't they didn't replace their current machinery, which is at least as effective as 1910, they would lose their federal funding. Because they wouldn't be then in compliance with state law.
What are you looking at me for? No,
I,
I think Mr. Avalani has. a
I
question.
had just a couple of other quick questions. I'm interested in particular, how it is that you train people to deal with very serious accidents, serious death accidents. Now, OSHA has a pretty robust organization, and they bring a lot of resources to to the scene when when something happens, when somebody lose a loss of life or a major casualty. So how do you replicate that capacity? And does it make more sense to yield to OSHA in cases like that?
So right now we're not an OSHA state, so we wouldn't there, and OSHA wouldn't come in currently. There is no yielding. OSHA's not showing up. So what we do now is very similar to, so I'm a former prosecutor, so we did, again, fatalities and things, negligent homicide investigations and such, which I oversaw. We handle it very similar to that in that we are investigating, we're interviewing witnesses, we're obtaining statements from witnesses to the event. We are finding out what the current standards and procedures are. What is the training that's being provided? Did they adhere to that training? Is that training sufficient? If it led to a crime in which accident reconstructionists show up, we request their reports. So we look at their reports, right, and to determine what did they determine happened and led to that injury. That is similarly how we, and so that is how we handle it. Is very similar to, and I think it is similar to where OSHA is. We utilize the resources that the state already has. I don't know if OSHA would show up with accident reconstructionists. I've never seen that when we do have OSHA cases that intersect with ours. It is an investigator that shows up very similar to mine and is taking witness statements. And they are also filing, subpoenas for the, local police accident reconstructionists if they did occur, if one occurred. So what we do is very similar to what I think OSHA would do based on just my limited experience of dealing with cases in which there was both a public and private employer involved in the serious injury.
And if I'm not mistaken, even if we were in an OSHA state, the Department of Labor would still be the entity that would be responsible for all of the, maintaining OSHA standards.
Correct.
And I think that, under no circumstances could OSHA ever show up on a public sector workplace and be taking over for the Department of Labor. That's not what a state plan does.
Correct.
You do have the option to work with them. There's nothing that prohibits you.
Right now,
Yeah,
just as much as they're willing to work with us, that's the only thing that would prohibit.
okay. So you could potentially draw on them, say, come and help us, and
No, so they won't come in and help us right now. So when we have instances where our jurisdictions intersect and they are already doing a report, sometimes we can request their report too. There are instances in which they will not share them with us. But if we try to maintain a relationship with them such that they are comfortable sharing their work product with us and vice versa. But there's nothing mandating it.
thank you. One final question is, it's involved reports. The current situation is that the employees were required to file the plan initially, as I understand it. So they had to come up with their safety plan, and they have to file that, has to be in the department somewhere. That was changed. They used to do it every year. They changed that. So now what they do every 2 years, they file
No, so that was taken, so there was an update to the statutes, which they do not. They just have to file a safety summary, not their full plan,
right.
with us once. And they are required to review their safety plan every 2 years, so that when we do inspections, both a wage and hour inspection and a safety inspection, with both public and private sectors, we do, as part of our standard request, ask to look at their safety plan to see if it has been updated within the last 2 years.
So is there anything we need to do in that area as we go through this transition to make sure that they're complying or updating?
I don't believe so. Both would require them to maintain and update every 2 years. I'll double check that, but I don't think that changes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are they required now to keep track of their recordable incidents? They have to report to you on an annual basis what their recordables are and,
So there's two statutes. So 281, RSA 281A-53 requires all employers, both public and private, to report all injuries, regardless of severity, to the department within 5 days of that injury, or alleged injury from, whether, to the department. They can do that either directly to us or via their carrier. Even if they choose to go via their carrier, they're supposed to report that to us. My safety inspectors farm that data before they go out for just a regular inspection, or even a complaint generated inspection. They're looking at that data to see what their injury rate, what are they seeing most commonly at that employer's location. The other statute is 277-15-b. That one requires all public employers to report serious bodily injuries, so injuries or death. So at a minimum, injuries requiring an overnight stay in a hospital, to the department, for which we would look at, analyze, and determine whether or not an investigation needs to take place.
follow. So if
And
I want
that has to be done within, I think it's 24 hours for a death or 8 hours for the death and 24 hours. But there is a time frame that's much shorter than the 5 days. Sorry.
right. So if I wanted a report of all of the accidents that happened in the Department of Labor last year, would I be able to get that from the data that you guys are collecting?
A report for
All of the incidents that happened last year
so
within a certain department?
we can a certain department, yes, we can generate because each one is saved via code. Now, will it be specifically detailed? We would then go in and if we need to, and read them. But yes, so you would see all the lower back injuries,
Just the statistical data
lacerations.
numbers.
Yes, correct. We can do that.
Further discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of this is in 277 that are already in law. Some of this will be in your rules. Should we look at having less rules and more of it stated within the statutes? That way people are clearer on what they need to follow and whatnot, instead of having a wholesale 1400 become a behemoth and then have the statute be more clear and specific.
I mean, both would have the same, rules have the effect of law. There are laws. I think I'm not. I think they could both get you to the same place. One just takes longer.
Would it also be true that if it's in rules and the OSHA standards get adjusted, you have the authority immediately to adjust your rules rather than having to wait for a new statute?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Ready for a motion? I want to talk about a time, our schedule here first. Okay. Right. We have to report everything out by Thursday, November 2nd, correct?
Sounds right.
So we have to have one last final meeting to discuss our of the Labor Committee, to discuss the 4 bills we have, to vote them.
In exec session.
Correct. Yep. All right. And it is kind of my opinion that we should have the entire committee here to have an opportunity to understand. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here. If we have our exec session, prior to execing this bill, I think you're going to need some kind of, there's going to be a lot of questions, I'm guessing, by the entire committee. So do we have something, we pick a date for the executive session,
Back it up.
an hour prior to that, to have the discussion on this one in particular. The other ones, everyone knows how they're gonna vote already, right? They all agree?
Yep.
On the other three bills that we have in front of us and the Labor Committee, everyone pretty much knows you have an amendment coming in, you know, so everything's gonna be pretty simple in the three of them. You and I have gotten into this a lot more. The committee's gotten into it a little further. Some of our other members don't have a clue what we've been up to.
Point taken.
So I'm just kind of looking at the timeline here as to what you want to do. Now, I would want initially to do this the 26th, Thursday, the 26th,
Yeah, but that ain't.
but now we have veto day. So we don't know if that's, pardon? Well, because we don't know, you know, we only have, what, 5 bills?
Right.
You know, we don't know how long the Senate's gonna,
I heard somebody suggest that we ought to be done by 3. I mean, I think that's being very generous.
I think so, because we're waiting, how many are on the Senate? We have to wait for the Senate.
I think we got 3.
5 mills, we should be done by noon.
Right.
So, do you want to do it after, or do it have to be the day before? Do we getting people up here on the 25th, and I don't think people want to be here 2 days. I'm not sure we're gonna have everything prepared by the 19th, to do it next Thursday with everybody. Looking for some comments from everybody here.
I'm on the beach.
You're not gonna be here next week?
I can't come.
Oh, good for you. Can I go? You know, do we ask people to come the 24th?
We do it on Monday,
Monday what?
before the 26th.
The 23rd?
I can do that.
I don't know, what do you think you're,
Oh, wait a minute. We have an appointment that day. Is it- How about like 2:00? Could do that.
for an exec session?
No, I'm talking on Monday. You don't want to do, you want to do the exec session on Thursday and a preview on Monday, correct?
I was hoping to do them the same day. I would rather have people come in here at 10 o'clock in the morning, have 1 hour of discussion on the OSHA thing, and at 11 o'clock, we start our executive session.
That would work with me.
But-
Frankly, you could build the whole thing into exec session and just leave a lot of time for the OSHA.
Correct. Right. I was hoping to do it only an hour before, just so, if people could really, some people won't show up, some people aren't gonna care, some of the ones really wanna dig into it, that's the only.
We're gonna want to have a full 20, we'll have to have 20 people here for an exec session.
Right.
So if people aren't showing up.
No, but I'm talking about doing it if they wanted it. What I don't wanna do is, I don't want an hour and a half long exec session just on this bill. It would be nice if we got to the exec session and we did what we're supposed to do in exec session, it lasts 15 or 20 minutes to get it done. So that's why I wanted to have something as a preview before then, and I was hoping to do it an hour before versus yanking people up here twice.
And we want to do it on Monday.
Well, I'm not, Mark, we're looking at everything. I'm looking at every day between now and November 2nd.
Okay.
Tuesday, the 31st, we're getting close.
You come in costume.
Oh, yeah, I guess, sure. I'll show up as a legislator.
Monday the 30th.
We have, I have employment, advisory board, yeah, so it would have to be the 31st or the previous week,
How about the 20? We're on the 23rd for a bit.
correct? 23rd, oh, well,
The 30th.
what are you saying?
The 30th,
Not for him.
No, Mark and I have something, Employment Securities Advisory Board. 20, see, I don't want to yank people up here that, how about, okay, well,
Talk among yourselves over there.
25th, the day before in the afternoon.
If you do the afternoon, yes. Anything after 2:30.
25th in the afternoon, for exec session. For all the bills.
I know we're going to have a caucus prior to the 26th at 3 o'clock. So then I hate to drag our whole committee away from a caucus.
How about the 24th?
Later in the day.
24th in the afternoon for executive session?
Going once. I could do that.
All right, I'm gonna go with the 24th.
What time, Lino?
Afternoon,
1 o'clock, okay?
2. So 1 o'clock gets me out, if I don't want, it's an hour and 10 minutes, so it puts me outside lunch.
That's,
2 o'clock gets me at least.
that's why I was asking you what time. You said afternoon.
2 o'clock on.
Okay.
2 o'clock on the 24th. That will be our exec session for all 4 remaining.
And 2
Let's
o'clock,
schedule this one last.
2 o'clock will be the presentation by,
the discussion of ocean.
yeah,
stuff.
and then 3 o'clock executive session.
That's fine.
Yes. That gives me a little extra time to get.
What I would like, however, is to have a recommendation from this committee going in. So I think at this point, it would be appropriate to have a motion from the subcommittee to do something. And I would suggest the motion should be to adopt option 2. And before we get to that exec session, obviously, we need an official amendment. But I think what we've got now drafted by the Department of Labor attorneys is specific enough, and I expect that OLS will just dress it up in their format. So I don't, it's not going to be much different.
Representative Sullivan, I will support your motion, subject to seeing obviously the amendment, and I am going to discuss this, obviously, I have discussed this with my leadership, option 2 and some of the things, but to move it forward in a position here, because I would be voting against option 1 at this point.
All right.
So I'll support option 2, subject to, a few caveats of seeing the final amendments and what have you.
Representative Susi, do we have a motion? Make it?
Exactly what you said.
Okay, motion by Representative Susi. Do we have a second?
If you want,
I'll second that.
Thank you. Thank you. Discussion.
Same comment, Mr. Chairman, that we want to see, and
I would hate to see us wait for the amendment, but of course, all bets are off if the amendment comes up very different from what we're talking about. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
yep. Are we ready to vote?
we are.
Representative Colcom,
Yes.
Representative Avalani,
Yes.
Representative McKenzie, you're actually not a voting member, but I'm glad you're here. Representative Bouchard. Representative Susi.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Mr. Chairman.
Yes. So we have a unanimous recommendation for the committee. I would like to thank the committee. I would especially like to thank the department. And I'm encouraged with where we're at. And I agree with Representative Infantine that this is something that I believe we can sell to the Senate once we get it past our House, of course. But I think we're moving in the right direction. So thank you, everyone.
Good. Before we leave, let me just say this, that in reading a recent press release from the Insurance Department.
Your microphone's off.
Should be congratulated, the Department of Labor, for the impact that your work has had on the rates in New Hampshire. For the past 12 years, the rate has come down 63%. So that's a major, that was the intent when this was passed, to reduce the injuries for people and to reduce the rate for employers. And this is another step in that direction. So thank you for the work that you've done over the years to make that happen.
Thank you.
Yes. 24th at 2 o'clock.
And welcome aboard, Miss Albert. It'll be a ride. Hold on. It'll be a fun ride.